Good afternoon and welcome to this open seminar at the National Museum of Iceland, aptly named COP27, Now What? Hosted by Höfða Reykjavík Peace Center, UNICEF in Iceland, Icelandic Youth Environmental Association, the United Nations Association in Iceland, and the Institute for Sustainability Studies at the University of Iceland. My name is Gunnar Dofri Ólafsson, and I will be your guide through this event for the next 90 minutes or so. The UN Climate Conference, COP27, is just behind us. In Sharm El-Sheikh, world leaders sought ways to respond to rapidly increasing climate change. After 30 years, a breakthrough agreement on a new loss and damage fund for vulnerable countries hit hard by climate disasters was reached. However, many stated their disappointment that no further steps were taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In this open seminar, we will review the results of the COP27 and ask, now what? What was the experience of people that participated in the summit? What message should leaders take back to Iceland? What is a child-friendly climate policy, and are Icelandic objectives in line with such policy? How much influence do young people have over the future of climate issues? Can we do better? And to discuss this, we have brought a number of people to the table, a number of experts that will be sharing their experience of the climate summit. We will start with two keynotes, first by Amy Wickham, program specialist on climate, energy and environment at UNICEF, and then Tinna Hallgrímsdóttir, chairperson, and Finnur Ríkharð Andrason, climate representative from the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association, will review the results of COP27 and share their vision for the future, with Finnur joining us virtually. After that, we will kick off the panel discussion. Enough of me. I would like to welcome you, Amy Wickham, to the stage.
Thank you, Finnur, and thank you all for this opportunity to be here speaking with you today. I'm really excited to share with you a little bit of my journey at COP and also from a UNICEF perspective, and then to talk a little bit about climate policies and child-sensitive climate policies. So, there's a lot of text on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of it, but to summarize, here are four kind of major areas where I put in some detail in terms of coming away from COP and key thoughts for children and young people and advances that have been made. The very first one is about recognition of the role of children as agents of change and the encouragement of parties to include children and young people in their process for designing and implementing climate policy and action. This is very positive. Another is on the cover decision including young representatives in their national delegations, and you'll hear through the course of this morning why that is important. The other is on the agreement explicitly recognizing the global right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment, building on a lot of great work that took place earlier in the year, adopted during Ungra in July and under the UNFCCC, which will bolster these efforts, mainstreaming rights in environmental governance. Then you have the Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action, which is a great collaboration between UNICEF, Youngo and the Children's Environmental Rights Initiative. So together with young people, this declaration was launched at COP in Madrid 2 years ago. And now we have 36 signatories. And these are governments who are really stepping up, deciding to commit to children and young people in their efforts on climate and environmental sustainability and climate action. And it has 7 very strong commitments that detail what that commitment overall looks like, and we would love if it was something that Iceland was willing to consider. On the top right, we have the breakthrough on loss and damage, and I think my colleagues will talk a little bit more about that this morning. And then on mitigation and keeping the 1.5 degrees alive, which is a slightly less positive update, but you know, there's plenty of text there summarized that you get a sense that we'll probably talk through as the morning session continues. Here we have on adaptation and the global goal on adaptation, and the parties agreeing to initiate the development of the framework for this. You also have this considering themes that are key for UNICEF and its work, including water, sanitation, hygiene, health, poverty, oceans and coastal ecosystems. And then you have efforts to embed human rights in the global goal of adaptation framework failing, which is again not so positive. But moving on, we have finance, the delivery and the commitment of developed countries providing 100 billion a year being well overdue, and this lack of progress and the frustrations associated with that for many countries present. Action for Climate Empowerment, again, a very key, important milestone for UNICEF in terms of how this is supporting activities around children's education and empowerment, as well as human rights, including children's rights, and numerous activities around youth participation. And then in the bottom right here, you have gender. Again, a really important sector, an area that was unfortunately it was a difficult decision, and at the end it was coming in quite late, agreed, but it was greeted with quite a lot of frustration and criticism from civil society. And the references that are included, there's a mere one operational reference to girls on engaging boys and men as strategic partners and allies in achieving gender equality. So, moving on from a lot of that text-heavy content that I've just shared, a few small personal reflections for me. I had been at COP in Madrid and COP in Glasgow, so the previous two COPs prior to Egypt. And my overarching feeling coming away was the sense that children, so I'm always talking about children and the climate crisis being a child's rights crisis. But present at Egypt this year, I got a sense far more than ever before that this is now being more widely understood and accepted. And I also noticed the greater youth presence and their agency, their involvement in events and activities and in the negotiation rooms. And that was really amazing to see. And then I also was involved myself in plenty of activities, both in the blue and the green pavilions. As a UN staff member, I don't have the access to the negotiation rooms. We have observer status, but we work closely with our government counterparts and towards, you know, ensuring that children's rights and children's environmental rights are included and considered in a lot of the discussions that are ongoing. UNICEF's positioning and engagement, it was larger than ever before in terms of number of staff, events that we supported, engaged with, opportunities, supporting country and partner pavilions. And my question now is, how will this translate to results for children? And I don't have that answer right now, but my hope is that this is a step in the right direction, and in terms of embedding children and their rights and their needs in these important climate negotiations and discussions. We launched a new partnership, and we also launched new data. And then the biggest thing is the role of young people. And that's why I'm excited to be at this event today. I feel like it's the young people who should be speaking before me about their roles at COP. And you know, I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to even be part of this panel discussion. So we as UNICEF were connected with a lot of young people, including 37, which we had accredited on UNICEF badges. And they were instrumental to a lot of the conversations, the meetings, the events that took place. And they were fantastic advocates for their rights and for the rights of young people more broadly. Youth as part of national delegations, absolutely brilliant to see how many of them were included in formal negotiations and were able to have their voices heard and to have a strong impact. And then also young people that we were connected to with Youngo was very key as well, and their involvement in more official spaces such as the Presidency Programme and the Children and Youth Pavilion. So I'll try and move on because I know I'm going to have quite a few slides. This is specifically now stepping into the data that we launched on child-sensitive climate policies for every child. So what is an NDC? A National Climate Action Plan from every country. It's information on mitigation and adaptation actions, and it's required by the Paris Agreement, updated every 5 years. Could I have a show of hands for everybody who already knew what an NDC was? Did I just waste 20 seconds? I am sorry. So why are they important? For policymakers, most of you know, setting clear targets to help meet the Paris Agreement goals. For advocates, including young people, analysing these can help us understand what a country is doing well and where they could be doing better, and then push governments to act. So what is a child and youth sensitive NDC? These are NDCs where the commitments in policy and action can strengthen the child critical social services to be more climate and disaster resilient. And they are policies and actions that are inclusive of all of children and young people's rights, participation, and role as stakeholders and drivers of change. So what did we do with the study? We analysed 167 NDCs that were submitted between September 2019 and October of this year. And that was all the NDCs that were updated or second NDCs. And we analysed them across these 4 pillars, and 22 more detailed indicators fed into the results of those 4 pillars. And these were the pillars. Was the NDC holistic and multisectoral? Does it address the specific risks and vulnerabilities of children and young people by including child-sensitive multisectoral commitments? Does it reference children and young people meaningfully Is it rights-based? Is there any consideration of children and young people as rights holders? And is there any meaningful references to children's rights or intergenerational justice and equity? And then the last is on inclusive. And this is whether the policy included and recognized children and young people as important stakeholders, both in the development of the NDC and in the consultation process, and also in the commitments that were made within the NDC. So here are the categories that we were able to score each of the NDCs based on whether they had 0, 1, or 2 of the pillars met would have been category C, 3 of the pillars would have been category B, and 4 of the pillars would have been category A. And all of this to say that an NDC that scored 4 out of 4, category A in this study, doesn't mean there's no room for improvement. It's specific to this study and this methodology that is very, very detailed and focused on particular indicators. And similarly, it's not to say that NDCs that scored category C in this study, that there was no hope or that they didn't have other fantastic positive examples within the NDC. So it's just to keep that in the back of your minds as I go forward and share a little bit more about the detail and the results, that this study, of course, has its limitations and it is specific to children and young people and a very detailed methodology focused on that. So the key findings from the study, we found that overall a mere 41% of NDCs could be considered child sensitive, which means there's still a lot of room for action, 59% to be exact. In terms of NDCs that have rights base, there was only 24% of them referencing the rights of children or intergenerational equity. For referencing children and young people meaningfully, there were 65% of the NDCs, and then holistic and multi-sectoral, just over half of the NDCs had child-sensitive commitments in at least 2 of the 9 sectors in the study. So in order to qualify for being holistic and multi-sectoral, there was just 2 of the 9 sectors that needed to be met, and that's like water, sanitation, hygiene, education, health. All of these details I'll go into just briefly. And then on inclusive, we had 23% of the NDCs mentioned that it involved young people, and only 2% involved children. And then within inclusive and that pillar of the analysis, we also had action for climate empowerment and found that 95% of them had commitments, indicators, or targets related to at least one ACE component, which is very positive. So on the holistic and multi-sectoral, I touched on briefly. On the right here, you can see, this is whether there is a child-sensitive water commitment in the NDC. We had 33% of them. If we look at food security and nutrition, it's just 22%. Or if we look at sanitation, it's only 13%. So that is, of the 52% of NDCs that have child-sensitive commitments in at least 2 of 9 sectors in the study, this is the detailed breakdown of those sectors and what those percentages were scored. Now, this is another interesting piece of work that we did within the study, which was we looked at, of the 167 countries that we analysed, where are the countries that are most at risk to climate change? So we pulled out the 54 from the Children's Climate Risk Index, a study that UNICEF launched last year, and it ranks based on exposure and vulnerability to find where are children and young people most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And there's a list of 33 extremely high-risk countries. They're predominantly in Africa. If you extend from extremely high to also include high risk, you have 54. So we looked at those 54 to see how holistic and multi-sectoral their NDCs were, and it was fantastic to note that 72% of them are. So what that is saying is where adaptation is really critical and is really needed the most, because the climate impacts are already happening and already impacting children, you have 72% of the policies are already ready. They already have the adaptation commitments and the child sectoral adaptation commitments included in their climate policies. So what's lacking is really the funding. The policies have the detail. Then moving on to examples. So this is a Namibia NDC, which would have scored 3 out of 4 of the pillars, so it would be considered child sensitive. If a policy scored 3 or 4 and was category A or B, they were among that 41%. So Namibia's category B child sensitive NDC includes plenty of good examples, and there's just 4 summarized here, and that is on young people's engagement and participation, young people's awareness raising, engagement, young people's engagement in offering solutions, and also young people's innovation in preparedness and response. And because I'm with you now in Iceland today, I also have an Iceland slide. And the category is C, which means 0 to 2 of the pillars were met. And in this case, it's actually 0 of the 4 pillars were met. but there are good examples and strong commitments that are included in this NDC that we cannot forget, and we need to keep them in mind. And this study is at a stage where many countries and many stakeholders were unfamiliar of the methodology of child and youth inclusive and child and youth sensitive NDCs, and that's part of why I'm sharing this with you today. So some of the strong commitments we've seen coming through in the Iceland NDC are the ambitious mitigation commitments, the human rights affirmed, the sectoral mitigation commitments critical for young people, and the participatory process in the development of the NDC. So moving forward, how overall can we use these findings? So here we have kind of 5 key areas, which I tailor based on who I'm having a conversation with. And often when it's young people, I feel like key would be to be informed and to partner and to act. You know, to be aware of your NDC, to know what the detail of it is, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities, to partner with peers who are also engaged, or organizations or stakeholders, or with your government representatives, so that you can discuss how best to address the gaps. And then to act is really to roll out what that plan looks like. And in terms of the implementation of the NDCs, and ensuring that all of those strong commitments also are considered in the implementation of the NDC. If it is somebody with a donor capacity, or it is a funder, of course, invest is key. And then monitoring, which is often, you know, with our governments and the governments who are accountable for NDCs, to ensure that they are also closely monitored, and the child-sensitive commitments as part of that. So, moving on, this is a data platform that we're in the process of launching. We'll have an event next week. If anybody would like to join, it'll be virtual online on the 7th at 8 a.m. EST. I can share the link. And this is where we will be launching the platform that we've developed with WRI's hosted platform called Climate Watch. So Climate Watch has this platform that is used for comparing NDCs with all of the various different commitments and indicators. And as of this year, UNICEF has shared and partnered with Climate Watch to have child and youth sensitivity of NDCs included as part of this global publicly accessible platform. So the link on the top right and the QR code in the top right and the link beneath the map brings you straight to where this child and youth sensitivity dashboard is. And we are hoping that it will make this information more well known, and it'll be a useful tool for everybody, but including young people when they are engaged in conversations about child and youth sensitivity of NDCs. So this is just some other materials that we work on, develop for young people on climate and environment with UNICEF, including the bottom right is a Learning for Climate Action. It's a learning passport, and there's a chapter for climate action that UNICEF has developed. Young people can go and access this self-taught modules on climate and environmental action. Then we have advocacy. We've been working closely with Youngo, leading climate advocacy in various countries globally. You know, the use of social media and consultations through polls like YouReport, where we are digitally engaging with young people. Toolkits for young climate activists. So this toolkit set has a load of booklets that are really trying to bring more complicated topics into a way that are easier to understand. And honestly, a lot of adults are reading them more than youth in many cases too. And the latest one that's going to be launched is Sustainable Energy. So December 13th, I think is the date we're going to launch it. So again, if anybody's interested, let me know. You're more than welcome to join. It's quite a technical document. It's about 60 pages, but it goes through all the importance of sustainable energy, and it's a guide for young people. And Iceland gets mentioned because there's the geothermal section as well. But yeah, these materials are just examples of other work that UNICEF is doing to support young people and their journey as they navigate through this complicated space of climate and environmental action. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. This was quite interesting, and if we could, I think this the QR code is live, so you can visit the website now. It looks really impressive when it's interactive. Interesting to see you mention that more adults are reading it than kids. One of my mentors, Sigurður Hagalín, said that when you are talking to the general public, you should assume that they are a reasonably enlightened 18-year-old, which is why I think Krakkafréttir is where most of us go to get a grasp of complicated issues on a language that we actually speak. So I think this is it's a beautiful example of that. But to bring the next keynote speakers to the stage, Tinna and Finnur are up next. Finnur will be joining us virtually, as I mentioned, and Tinna physically.
Hi. So we're going to start by playing a video of Finnur's presentation, or part of the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Finnur. I'm the climate representative of the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association. And unfortunately, I couldn't be here with you all today. I'm currently in the Netherlands where I'm studying. But I was at COP27 as the Icelandic UN Youth Delegate, so I was the young person in the Icelandic delegation. So I'm going to share a few things from my experience at COP27. Firstly, I want to cover quickly what is a conference of parties, what these COPs are. They are annual conferences of the countries who have signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC. This convention was first created in 1993, and by now 197 states have ratified this convention. And what it means is that we have this big convention that was signed about 30 years ago, and then it provides this sort of umbrella for all the other things that we do in terms of climate change on the global scale. So we have the Kyoto Protocol, we have the Paris Agreement, and these yearly conferences, which all fall under this framework convention. And the overarching goal of this convention is to work together as a global community to prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system, so to prevent the worst impact of climate change. These yearly conferences have several purposes, mainly to discuss and take decisions regarding how we're going to prevent this dangerous human interference, or how we're going to prevent the worst impacts of climate change. This is done through discussing which level of ambition we want to have as a global community, which collective goals we want to set on several climate-related topics, how we want to collectively report on our progress and track where we're at, and furthermore, how we're going to implement the action that's required to achieve the goals that we set ourselves collectively. Since the first COPs, these conferences have grown in size and also importance, I would argue, because we haven't reached the level of action that we need so far, which means that every conference that we don't reach the required action, the one after becomes more important in terms of reaching good outcomes. So other than the original purpose of the conferences, which is for countries to come together and decide on how they're collectively going to solve the climate crisis, the conference has sort of grown quite a lot. And now there's side events and what we call pavilions inside the conference zone as well. And this is where countries, country alliances, institutions, universities, NGOs, civil society, multiple different stakeholders in society can have sort of like a booth within the conference area and present their research, their efforts, their solutions, initiate discussions, debates to advance climate action on several fronts. This year at COP27 there were 40,000 people who attended, which I think may be a record number. And these are of course very, very diverse stakeholders and actors within the climate community, including negotiators, of course, who are at the heart of the conferences, who are in the meeting rooms deciding what the countries are going to do collectively. Then there are government representatives, so parliamentarians and ministers. Then there are NGOs like ours. And then, of course, businesses and citizens, scientists and others. To give you a little taste of what COP27 this year looked like, of course, it was held in Egypt, in Sharm El-Sheikh. It was warm, 27 degrees in the sun on average, I think. And here you can see the sort of main area right after the entrance. The buildings on the right and in the back. That's where some of the official side event meeting rooms were. So there were presentations, for example, by the IPCC in there. Here you can see one of the negotiation rooms, so where the country representatives come together to discuss the various topics on the agenda. Here you can see a group of Nordic young people in the Nordic Pavilion handing over a statement of various demands to Nordic politicians. You can see some ministers, some politicians, and some young people. Here's a protest, also close to the entrance of the conference zone. It had been announced before the conference that protests within the area and outside the area would be banned. So in the first few days, we weren't quite sure if we would see protests, but they have become an integral part of the conferences. And thankfully, as the days went on, more people started being brave and testing the limits. We had more and more people protest, and it became apparent that the enforcement of this protest ban wasn't really strict. Another example of a side event that we participated in, here we can see Tinna presenting in the Children and Youth Pavilion. The project that we carried out last year, where we graded the environmental policies of the political parties before the parliamentary elections. And the goal of this was really to share our methodology with other youth, with other NGOs, to encourage them to carry out similar projects to influence climate politics in their own countries. We also met with our minister, Minister of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries, and exchanged some thoughts and what we thought was important for Iceland to bring back home from the conference, because of course these conferences are one thing, but then we need to take those decisions and bring them back home and act on them in our own countries and communities. And then here you can see a photo of Anna, who is in the national delegation, and myself reading over one of the final drafts of the final decision on the last day. And this is a very typical photo, I think, for the atmosphere in there. Lots of people reading over hundreds of pages of text, which will have a global impact. Moving on to the outcomes and these texts that I'm referring to. What we call the grand bargain at COP27 is something that we've been trying to conceptualize for a while. This is this sort of compromise that was achieved between historically and currently divided groups, so the developed and the developing countries, who do have different interests, they have different capabilities when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. It's often talked about that mitigation ambitions, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions, is something that the developed or wealthy countries want more, whereas the developing countries want more adaptation and finance for loss and damage, because they're already experiencing the impact of climate change. We saw this at this COP as well, where increased ambition was an integral part of the narrative of the rich countries, whereas increasing the financial ability of developing countries to take climate action, the required climate action in their countries, was central to their narrative. And this isn't only relevant for this COP, this has been a part of the process from the very beginning, where we've had different interests, national interests, regional interests, and it often boils down to historic responsibility of greenhouse gas emissions, where the developed Western world or the global north have emitted a lot more historically, and therefore are more responsible for the climate crisis than the global south. And then not only in terms of emissions, but also in terms of the accumulation and distribution of wealth. And this is something that is very central to these conferences, is how wealth is distributed and how it has to be redistributed in ways to achieve the goals that we set ourselves collectively. Although it can be easy to frame it this way, the developed versus the developing world, we do have increasingly more nuances in these debates and discussions, where, for example, China, India, Saudi Arabia, and Russia are sort of on the borderline now. Do we consider them as developing countries, or are they transitioning to being developed? And what comes with this, what responsibilities comes with this increased level of being developed and increased greenhouse gases that increased level of development. But on the topic of accumulation and distribution of wealth, which is central to these discussions and understanding the dynamics and the outcomes, we come to the fact that money talks. Money talks can be understood in two ways. Firstly, money talks as in money makes things happen, money moves things. Finance is essential to achieving climate action. We can't implement the solutions without the money to buy the required technologies or buy the required land or fix the issues. But also the fact that the money talks are difficult. It's challenging to talk about this, and the conference was really one big money talk, where finance really cut across multiple of the different topics that were being discussed at the conference. One of these topics was the unfulfilled pledge of $100 billion that the Western countries or wealthy countries agreed upon in Copenhagen in 2009, if I remember correctly. So this is one of the main sort of targets at the moment that are being discussed. This pledge was supposed to be fulfilled by 2020, but it wasn't, and I think the estimates show that it will be reached next year, so 2023, which is 3 years late. This is something that has reduced significantly the trust of developing countries to developed countries, as they have not met this pledge. Some have pointed to the fact that a major donor who should be contributing to this, the United States, did pull out of the Paris Agreement for some time, and that may be one of the causes. But nevertheless, this $100 billion pledge was also simply pulled out of a hat. It's not really in line with the needs of developing countries, which are somewhere in the trillions of dollars, I think between $2 to $5 trillion. So the fact that this goal or pledge has not been met is a very big issue of concern. Another important thing to mention is that a lot of the money being provided to developing countries now is in the form of loans, and this is highly problematic as multiple developing countries already have a lot of debt. So it's important that we focus on increasing grant-based finance, not to further in-debt countries who are already in a very difficult situation financially, but also in terms of the impact of climate change. One positive thing that came out of the money talks at this COP was a sort of urgent call to reform multilateral development banks and international financial institutions, whereby the international community wants them to redirect their financial flows, redirect the way they work in a way that unlocks a lot more climate finance and channels it into the areas where climate finance is really needed to achieve the goals that we've set ourselves. And lastly, on the money topic, there was also a lot of discussion on diversifying where the money comes from and how we can use it. So the private sector was talked about quite a lot. How do we get the private sector to invest in the solutions required? How do we get the sort of fair share of their profits into this global effort against climate change? So that's also something that was interesting that came out of this COP.
Yes. Thank you, Finnur. I'm going to take over the rest of our presentation. Okay, so my name is Tinna. I'm the chairperson of the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association, or Ungir, umhverfissinna. And I want to speak about loss and damage, which was by far the most prominent topic at this year's COP. Loss and damage, for those who don't know, has become like the third pillar of these UNFCCC terms we're using, which is mitigation, then we have adaptation, and then we have loss and damage, which is basically climate change impacts that are so severe that they can't be adapted to. So going beyond adaptation, either because of the impacts are so severe, or there could also be lack of infrastructures or other reasons. And we really saw a lot of loss and damage, especially this year. We saw floods in Pakistan. At one point, 1/3 of the country was underwater, leaving thousands dead and millions homeless. We also saw huge droughts in East Africa, so this has been something that's extremely prominent this year and has been gaining momentum. However, developed nations such as the US have been resisting the call for climate finance for loss and adaptation for years, mainly because they're concerned that it might open up floodgates of liability and compensation. However, in Paris in 2015, we agreed that climate finance is not for liability and compensation. So now we're thinking about this more in terms of solidarity, and further, to secure the global security and stability of our community, because we're all interlinked, and when nations are simply struggling with the impacts of loss and damage to an extent that they can't be funding education, their healthcare systems, etc. So we really need to think of this as a global issue. I included here a quote by Mia Mortley, which got a bit weird on the slides, but she's the Prime Minister of the Barbados, and she's been a really active spokesperson for developing nations. She said, "We were the ones whose blood, sweat, and tears financed the Industrial Revolution, and it's fundamentally unfair to pay the cost of emissions as well." So, for this COP, the G77 plus China wanted to put this on the agenda. So we're putting loss and damage finance formally on the agenda. Nevertheless, there was some resistance, and there was an agenda fight lasting 48 hours, but I finally managed to make it to the agenda. So the main polls at the beginning were that developing nations wanted to establish a fund at this COP, and then we would flesh out the details later, whilst developed nations wanted a mosaic and variety of funding options, possibly maybe resulting in a fund in 2 years or in some other timeline. It was just, this issue was in backlog, it was in deadlock for many days, and we didn't think that we would see a real result. But then the EU came up with a proposal. They wanted a fund for the most vulnerable, but they also wanted to broaden the donor base. So we would go beyond this old definition of developed and developing countries, something that Finnur mentioned a bit before. So they wanted to open the donor base for countries, for example, like China, these emerging economies. Developed nations were a bit skeptical of this proposal at first, also because we know that developed nations have not been meeting their already existing climate pledges. In the final decision, an agreement was reached, so the recipients of the fund are now defined as those particularly vulnerable, so we see a change. EU said most vulnerable, it goes to particularly, but also we have no clear definition of which countries qualify as that, so that's something that also needs to be clarified. The donor pool was also not clearly defined, but we see in the text that a mosaic of actors are urged to support the fund. And we also see a mention of financed under and outside the UN process. And there was a lot of talk about these innovative sources of finance at this COP. For example, a windfall tax. That was something coming from the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, also from Mia Mortley. For example, if we would have put a 10% tax on the profits of fossil fuel companies, by the end of this year we would have 33 billion, and they would still be making record profits compared to last year. So there are many options here. Also a talk of debt swaps and international taxes. So we've already agreed we're going to establish a fund, but who's going to pay, who's going to receive? Money's not been streaming in already, so this also needs to be taken further, and there's now a committee of 24 people that's going to proceed with this process, and we'll hopefully see something at next COP. So, fossil fuels. There were 600 fossil fuel lobbyists at this COP, many a part of the national delegations. That's sadly the reality we're facing now, and it was also last year. Nevertheless, at last COP, at COP26, we managed to mention fossil fuels for the first time in a UNFCCC text. So there we agreed that we were going to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. You see there's always a lot of, the language gets quite watered down at the end. But also to phase down unabated coal. And some parties came to this COP wanting to make progress on that wording. And in the end, we had many countries that wanted to extend this phrase to all fossil fuels, so phase out unabated fossil fuels or phase them down. And in the end, we had 85 nations supporting this. Nevertheless, it never made it to any of the draft texts proposed by the Egyptian presidency. But this is very important, as we know that we need to phase out all fossil fuels, and we see the IEA has stated that we can't have any new fossil fuel projects. This was actually released last year, so we're behind, if we are to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And we also see that the wording on renewable energy, that we need to transition to renewable energy, in the final meters got changed to low emission and renewable energy, opening up loopholes for other sources, and we're talking oil perhaps. 1.5 alive. So it was truly sad that some parties came to this COP wanting to water down what we'd already decided in Glasgow last year. So some wanted to revert to the language of the Paris Agreement, where we're aiming for 2 degrees and leaving 1.5 as a looser aspiration. Nevertheless, this issue was resolved, and I think a big part of that was when Xi and Biden finally met after there was a bit of a freeze of their negotiations or talks before COP, where we had the G20 summit, and the G20 released a joint communique where they repeated the language last year on 1.5. So we managed to keep 1.5 there. But nevertheless, we're missing a lot of things that would actually keep us on track to reach those goals. So we're missing a mention of emissions need to peak the latest before 2025. We're of course missing a mention to phase out all fossil fuels. The wording on energy, like I said before, is too loose, and the mitigation work program needs more ambition, and it also needs to be linked to the pledges made in Glasgow. So we didn't make enough progress on that also. This is very important, as we know that there's a huge emissions gap. And we saw in the UNEP emissions gap report released just before COP that current NDCs, that is, the climate pledges each party proposes, is heading us towards 2.6 degrees. And if we look at the policies that are supposed to be in place to implement those targets, we're heading to 2.8. So it's crucial that parties revisit and strengthen their climate goals for NDCs before next COP. And that was something that made it to this cover decision, actually also to the cover decision of last year, but we saw not very many parties do that. So it's more important that we do it now and parties come forward with really bold targets, so we'll diminish this gap. Also want to mention that Amy also talked about we speak a bit about youth in the cover decision. So youth are recognized as critical actors, both in designing, implementing climate policy and action, and also parties are encouraged to consider including young delegates into the national delegations. And we see here that we already have Finnur in our delegation, which is very good. Also just some exciting firsts. Amy mentioned already we have the right to a healthy environment mentioned in the cover decision, very good. And we also are starting the first work program on just transition. So what is the road ahead? We know that the Icelandic delegation was speaking really much about 1.5 degrees and the need to keep the language there and to aim for that, because that is clearly the red line we can't cross if we want to secure a livable future. Nevertheless, we feel like Iceland could do more to have 1.5 degree compatible targets. So we now have a reduction goal of 55% reduction in ESR emissions. Nevertheless, that goal remains only stated in the government coalition agreement, so that goal needs to be put into law. Furthermore, we don't have a plan how to reach that goal. There's now work going on how to update the climate action plan. And we fully hope that that climate action plan will deliver the results we need and will truly result in a race to the top because it's an industry sectorial approach to reach that goal. But we need to remember that this only covers a small percentage of Iceland's overall emissions, because if we are to achieve our goal of carbon neutrality by 2040, pretty ambitious, but the thing is we have not yet defined how we're going to account for the biggest emission factor there, which is land use change, and forestry. So we need to determine how are we going to account for that in this carbon accounting, and then how are we actually going to reach it. So we need to act fast there too. Once we've done that, we could also turn in a renewed long-term low-emission development strategy, which developed nations are especially urged to turn into the UNFCCC. We've already done so, but that was very presenting a few ideas, but we've not really made our decision as to how we're going to reach it, so that's very important. Lastly, we want Iceland to look at the recall in this covered decision as of last year too, to update their NDC at COP28. We know we're already a part of a joint NDC, but we wish to see Iceland establish itself as a climate leader that it claims to be, and therefore we need to have independent ambition and show the world that we're really trying to take lead on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tinna and Finnur, if you are watching. Thank you very much. I would now like to rearrange the chairs and welcome to the panel our panelists. Amy Wickham, you know, please take your seat. But joining her are Steffi Meisel, Education and Promotion Representative for the Icelandic Youth Environmental Association, Halldór Þorgeirsson, Chairman of the Icelandic Climate Council, and Helga Barðadóttir, Head of the Icelandic Delegation. Welcome. And please do not hesitate to fire away with questions if you have them out there. These were very enlightening and informative presentations, which I do believe will leave you with a lot of questions. I know they do for me, and I'm going to push a magic button for the ones that are that are watching us virtually. I would like to open up by addressing you, Halldór. You have publicly highlighted the decision on loss and damage as a significant milestone. Why is this significant, and how does loss and damage finance differ from other climate finance?
Well, let me just continue with kind of the excellent thread that Tinna was weaving, and if I can, let me just say it makes me proud to be an Icelander and seeing these young people. It's not just in soccer that we have stars. So I think we should be paying more attention to this, so I welcome very much this event. But it's really important for us to now help people to understand what loss and damage is and what's not. And it is very useful to think of it in the spectrum that Tinna drew up. And this has been looming for quite some time, that let's think first of humanity. We're taking a certain level of risk, actually a very high level of risk, actually ridiculously high level of risk. So let me stop here. And so there was a decision in Paris to put a limit on that risk. And we know that, and it's very important to keep focused on that. However, the consequences of that risk are not evenly distributed across the planet. It's a stochastic or random. You were hit this year, you will be hit next year, and we don't know who will be there after that. So it is very much an issue of sharing risk. And it's important for us to think of how we as mankind have dealt with risk in the past. And one of the most powerful tools has been insurance throughout the centuries. I don't have the time to explain this here, but it's a hugely important part of actually being able to deal with fluctuations in climate risk. So insurance is a very important tool, but like anything else, insurance has limits. And here I would want, because Icelanders, we do very much tell stories. And so it's actually a story that, or a moment that is very strong in my mind. I was just across the street where Amy works for 9 months in UN headquarters after Paris. And one of the things we did there jointly with the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the time, the Secretariat in Bonn and Ban Ki-moon, was to convene a meeting of all of the entire insurance industry. And I've never been in a room with as much money as that day. And this is public, so I'm not disclosing anything. But there was very clear signal from the insurance industry, 2 degrees is not insurable. Let me repeat it, because people might have forgotten about this now. Yes, we can insure things, but 2-degree world is uninsurable. And this might sound as kind of a scare tactic, but look at this peninsula that sticks down from the continent of North America, the US, called Florida. The insurance industry there is really, they're just, what do you call it when you're eating your nails? Waiting to see how Ian will come through and if they will be able to get reinsurance. So it's important to say these things because we have been kind of ignoring this. So why am I telling this story? What we are really starting now through this decision on loss and damage to start building that solidarity foundation for dealing with risk. And Iceland actually has, and many other countries have actually have some experience with this. You will know this, the Icelandic word for this is ofanflóðasjóður. Ofanflóðasjóður.
Viðlagatryggingar back in the day.
Or viðlagatryggingar. Yeah. So it's basically risk sharing. Every property owner in Iceland pays into a fund, and that's used to deal with avalanches and landslides, and you know that they tend to come from mountains. So even though your building is as far from a mountain as you can be in Iceland, this is about 100 kilometers or so, you still pay into it. So it's a solidarity issue, and but there are other examples. We don't have time to go through this here, just so that you realize here that this is not some future music. The Caribbean experience with risk insurance, parametric insurance for hurricanes is actually quite good. And the whole idea is that you give a country that has been hit by a hurricane of certain duration, certain intensity, cash within days to recover. So it's such an important step that we now move in this direction. You can see that I'm passionate about this because it's been such a difficult journey. And let me this is my final observation. I actually worked for this process for 14 years. And the first conference of the parties where I was actually on the UN side was in Buenos Aires in 2004, and it almost collapsed because there was a footnote in the document that could be interpreted as a reference to insurance. That was the first kind of inkling of the loss and damage dynamics. And so this has been there for such a long time, and it's wonderful that we are now in the building phase for this. It takes time. It was very much a similar process that was set up to develop the Green Climate Fund. So, I mean, it's a known methodology. It's going to take longer. We need to be on track by Abu Dhabi or Dubai, sorry. But it won't be finished by then, because it really shouldn't be finished by then. It should be done well. And so this is, I hope I have kind of responded to your question. But we need to explain this also in Iceland, because words are very important here. And this notion of bótasjóður, which is the Icelandic word that has kind of started being floating, I think is quite unfortunate. We should use terms that we are used to, viðlög, viðlagasjóður, viðlagatrygging, basically sharing risk, and the fact that we are we are all on this planet and we're wrecking it together, so why not share the risk?
Thank you. Yeah, it's you have always a pleasure. You've been in this field so long and have such deep insight. Well, not but. There is a sort of a feeling that the wind is shifting. That we talk less about preventing and more with coping. And I'm not sure that the Icelandic public, the government, those that are in power, have fully realized that. So it's something that it's a shift in the wind, and it feels kind of uneasy for someone who's brought up in the end of history after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where everything was possible and everyone was optimistic and we wore ridiculous jeans, going into this world where optimism is maybe something that is, we always need optimism, but it has to be curbed by the fact that bad things might happen and we might not be able to prevent them, but only adapt to them.
Well, yeah, I think we should avoid this notion of optimism or pessimism. We need to just be determined that we're going to deal with this. Yeah. And it's very important that we avoid wishful thinking. But and this is why I think now, while we described it as a shift, basically what we will be doing is we will be doing all of the above. So it's an and and an and and an and. Yeah. So it's not a choice. Yeah. You're not asked, can you take a hurricane this year, or would you rather take it next year?
Or can you do some shift from fossil fuels or hurricane? Which will it be?
So and the new executive secretary is from Grenada. That country lost 3 years of GDP in 24 hours.
Wow.
So that's not new. That's been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. But we are still trying to ignore those facts. But it's also so much better to face the reality and do something about it, because it will only be more expensive and more difficult if we wait.
Yeah, time is now. Steffi, you are the Education and Promotion Representative for the Icelandic Youth Environmental Association, one of the organizers of this meeting. What is the sort of the feeling among young environmentalists and young people in the wake of COP27? We've had Finnur describing what it was, what the mood was at the COP, but afterwards, is there any? Do you notice a shift, or what is the mood?
I think for me, at least, I haven't talked to too many people since I'm back, because it was all very overwhelming. But I'm more.
That might be our answer there.
I'm more determined than ever to act and to push into gear. We had some meetings with the Minister of Environment, Climate and Energy, a few meetings with UU and him, and we are always trying to push him very much to build these actions around the goals that Iceland have. Because what the problem is, and I'm speaking also from my personal view, Iceland has a lot of ambitious goals. We have these 2030 being half the emissions and then being carbon neutral by 2040. But if you look at our emissions, if you look just at the picture of it, and it's not realistic. And this is something I'm going with UU. We got a grant for this to high schools in Iceland. It's called the framhaldsskólakynningar. So I'm telling the high schoolers about these things. And I'm always showing them the statistic or the picture and say, like, look, these are all emissions now. And we want to be like here in 10 years and here in 20 years. So what do you think? And these people that have mostly no big education on this, on environment, like we do, they're suddenly saying, like, no, that's not realistic. And so even these people understand, high schoolers understand it's not realistic. So how can our environmental minister not understand that? And that's really something. No, he's very like, because you talked about optimism, he's very optimistic about this. Like, yeah, we don't want to push too hard. We want to let we need to keep business going. We need to let the companies do their part and so on. So, and like, no, no, we really need to act now. And for me, it's also, like we're in Iceland, we're really far north, we're not so touched on by what's happening in the south, but I met so many people and I'm still like almost shaking by remembering their stories. If you think about the Maldives, the minister just sits there and says, you know what, in 7-8 years by the end of this decade, we're going to be underwater. That's just like almost a fact. And these people know that there will be millions displaced. And imagine if someone would come to me and say, imagine Iceland will be underwater in 7 years. That's just a fact. It's just sea level rise. You will deal with it. We maybe help you, but we're not sure. So it's like I'm so touched on by these stories and understanding their relations. Everything we do in Iceland will impact what's happening in other countries. We're not the only ones that can prevent it or help it, but we're really a part of it. And so language, like you said, is very important. And the minister, he also said a few weeks ago, as I heard, he said if everybody would be like Iceland or every country would be like Iceland, we wouldn't have a climate crisis. He said this, and that is very wrong. That is, I really much disagree with him because sometimes language is important. We need to understand we have really a role to play. And this desperation that I sometimes feel, I'm so happy that I have the UU, that I have the young environmentalists to get the structure to act. Because this is a great association, and even me as a foreigner who was not born here, I can play my part. And if I'm desperate being at home and being overwhelmed, I just know I can go to them, I can have a meeting with them, and like, what are we going to do now? And we have the power here in Iceland. It's such a small country. We have really short ways to communicate. We can pressure the politicians. We can really do that, and we really have to tell them, okay, how are we going to do that? You have all these great goals. Goals are amazing, but how do we do it? How do we act? Like, what are we going to do? So really pressure the politicians. I'm probably being further from your question now, but I'm feeling really like I need to act now. I need to do something. So this is the feeling I got from COP.
It's a great insight, and good to hear that. That like you said, there is structure that you can go to channel this feeling, this sort of like this energy. Yes, because it's not only the feeling of not being able to do anything, but you actually can do something through these channels. And I would like to put a pin in the that you said, the goals, because it's something that's very, as Tinna mentioned in her keynote, goal. We have a very ambitious goal, but I'm yet to see the implementation of how we're going to get there. Moving over to you, Helga, you a veteran of the COPs, the head of the Icelandic delegation. Finnur, Tinna, they told us about their experience. What was yours, and does it differ in any way from theirs and from previous COPs?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not the biggest veteran here on COPs, but and I would like to thank Tinna. No, I'm sorry, I could be misunderstood. More experienced. I would like to thank Tinna and Finnur for their excellent overview of COP, and I think in most of what I can assimilate to most of what they have said. It was what my experience is that, for example, compared to Glasgow last year, I think when we came to Glasgow, no one had been to a big meeting for over a year or two. Everyone was so excited to come there and make big decisions, and I felt there were more optimism, more energy at that COP. And we, as Tinna has mentioned, we managed to have phase down of fossil fuels for the first time in the COVID decision. That's something that was actually fought against at this COP. It was like a slam in the face that people were not willing to really build on what we decided upon at Glasgow. So just to keep 1.5 alive is still a struggle. To reference the Glasgow decision was a struggle. To reference human rights, youth, everything, that was also a struggle. So it was a bit disappointing in a way, but we managed to keep that at least. So it's a bit, it was not a step back, but we didn't get much further. So, and
a standstill.
Standstill in a way, but I think we also have to, even though it hasn't been mentioned much, but there is a war ongoing in the world. So maybe, as Timmerman said, we can't fight on all frontiers at the same time. So maybe this is where we got at this COP. So we have to look for next COP. Maybe we can get more ambitious at that time. So that was my take on it, I think. And I was very privileged to have these young people from Iceland at COP and in the delegation. And we really tried to inform the youth of what is happening, what we know and they don't know, but they are really very, very informed and and it was good discussion. And we really tried to have the youth delegate attending all the meetings, not select specific meetings that the youth delegate can attend. It was open to whenever it was possible. So we think that's very important, and we really think that this is a system that is going to continue to have a youth delegate in the official delegation. So,
yeah, that's definitely a good thing. And as you mentioned, Amy, youth is mentioned quite a lot. Children, not so much. Are children being left behind or underrepresented in climate discussions, do you think?
That's a good question. So this year was the first COP where I did see more presence of children, but of course it is very minimal. We had a few young children who were supported by UNICEF also to be present. And there was a moment where Francisco, I'm not sure if many of you have come across Francisco, he's 12 or 13 years of age from Colombia. And he came and he joined us for a meeting with the Global Stocktake, and he made an intervention through one of the governments who welcomed him to speak through them, because of course he's too young to speak. And then he was offered the floor by the chair, which was quite unprecedented to ever see somebody, and then somebody that young, just be offered the floor by the chair in a Global Stocktake meeting. And that was a moment where everybody just paused and then gave him an applause, because what he had to say was so important as a child, you know, talking about this from the heart and how important these discussions and negotiations are. And that's just one example of bringing to real life the conversations that are happening inside those negotiation rooms. And I don't think COP is a comfortable environment to bring a lot of children. I think it's actually quite a stressful environment, and it's not the place. But I do think there are ways that we need to think about having more that voice of children represented. And maybe it's not through having young children like Francisco present, but that was a moment for me where I thought, we have to do better. We have to do better at having this voice captured in a safe way that's not uncomfortable, like it can be for young people navigating those corridors. And even I got lost multiple times finding my way from one pavilion to another. So yeah, I think there's more to be done, and I think this year definitely it was an important step in the right direction, but I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Is there anywhere I haven't seen this address? Is it public anywhere, or can you? Is it
on public social media? It could be on his Instagram.
Yeah.
Francisco has his own Instagram where he puts a lot of his advocacy and what he's doing and his initiatives. It might be there.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see if it is there. Now, any questions from the audience? At least one question from the audience, yes. Do you have a microphone or no?
Thank you. My name is Margaret. I'm working for Save the Children Iceland, of course, for the right of the child, for a good future without disasters from climate change. And I'm just asking you, you said you want to act, and I want to ask you how, and what I'm meaning that, of course, we know that it's the politics that have in their hands the laws and put the policies and so on, but the power is maybe most where the money is, with the big companies and that have the powers, and the rich ones that have the most emissions. And when the people are asked to do things that are very important, of course, that, for example, not use the fossil fuels in their cars and not fly too often. We have lots of private jets that have lots more emission that the public does with their daily habits. So I'm asking you, how do you see we can act now and quickly for the future of the child, and how can we stop these the people that put the most greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and not only, and also cut the trees in Africa and so on, just to make money? How can we stop that?
That's a very big question, but for me, before I can act, I need a basis of information, because without knowing the backgrounds or have any information, I cannot act. Then it's just going to end up of, some people that went to COP, I had the feeling they were not as informed as I hoped they would be, the politicians, and then they're just putting speeches out that don't really fit with what the knowledge, that scientific knowledge I have. So one part of acting for me is to get the information out. I do this through various ways. That's why I probably was chosen to be the media representative for UU. So we do this with projects like going to high schools and present those informations, and also get the feeling of what's the youth, like what is the feeling with those high schoolers, what are they interested in, and then I adjust my presentations to telling them stuff they're interested in. For example, some people want to become mechanics. They wanted to really know what's going to happen. Iceland's going to get all the cars out and only electric cars in. What's my future as a mechanic? So really see what the youth wants to know, what are their goals, and then kind of get a baseline of information. So I think that's really important for acting. And I'm also trying this with adults. I had a short speech at COP at the Nordic Pavilion where I addressed some MPs, and I was challenging them. I said, like, do you have a big car? Do you have a big house? What is your clothes? Like, are you a big consumer, basically? And I told those politicians, you're a role model for youth. If youth wants to be like, my dream is to have a big house, and then a bigger car, and then maybe 2 cars, and I want to have all these nice clothes and jewelry and all this is a really big part of emissions. And I told those MPs, it's like, we cannot go on like we are living now with this like consumption-based, which Iceland is very big on, I have to say, I'm sorry, but I have to say it's very consumer-driven, Iceland, very, very, very much. So we have to change the values. That's what I said in the speech. We have to change the values. What values are we giving our kids? What are we living? Do we live a lifestyle for them that will only cause more and more harm around the world? So that's a big thing for me. So I'm trying through little changes. I tell them about, I'm going dumpster diving. This is not because I'm poor and I don't have money. I'm going dumpster diving because it's a protest for me against this massive food waste that's happening in Iceland. We're throwing food away. How can that happen? I talked to the Minister of Agriculture, told her, can we not maybe have something that prevents these stores, to make it not attractive anymore to throw the food away. So all these like little things, our consumer behavior and our values, what do we value? Do we value consumption, or do we value going out with our kids, with our family, enjoying nature, enjoying what we have here in Iceland? So I think it's these both. We need to get a better education out on really simplistic things, not too technical, and showing a different value that we can have with these things. Instead of buying, we should repair. We have a tool library. We should really value what we have. And looking at Sorpa, maybe some of you seen the post, what is arriving at Sorpa every day. We really need to look into these things. And if you shift the value, if you put good education and information out there, then people will go into action. Then they will maybe vote for another party because they see what this party is doing. So this is, some of the things.
But just to add, because for more than 20 years, there have been emphasis to implement environmental study to all education. But it's just in the primary schools and the kindergartens, but not in the secondary schools, just little one, just one course or something, and nothing at the, for example, in learn financial studies, and you have nothing about it. But of course, it's very important to change values.
Yeah.
But maybe this is the most important, of course, values and act. But now maybe we don't have time just to wait for people change their values for decades. So we have to just not wait. I want to do that, but you have to do that.
We have 2 more questions in the room. I have to ask you to be brief. We have 3 questions in the room, so you have to be super brief. And I hope you've all seen this Sorpa post, because I made it.
Yeah, just thank you so much for this wonderful meeting. And I just have a question, because of course I've been working on climate issues for some time, and I think that it's very important that the rich nations are leading by example, by cutting emissions. And I feel a little bit ashamed about our rich country, that they are not putting more ambitious plans on the table. And I would like to ask, what is the goal of the Icelandic government to put forward for the next COP28 as an ambition, as a role model for the world? And I would also like to ask Halldór, because I totally agree with you. I think it's 70% of the emissions are coming from 100 companies in the world. And how is this kind of reflecting? Because is it old-fashioned, this COP? Are we really getting out there? Would we need the financial ministers? Who should be at the table at COP to make these things happen? And I think there's some kind of structure that should kind of be a little bit different. And also this question of court. There are always more and more climate issues going to court. Was that kind of a discussion? Could you also reflect a little bit on that? Thank you.
Sum up the questions? Yep, thank you. There has not formally been put forward a goal to set forward new goal at next COP, but that's something we are looking into. And I have to say that now we are trying to find out how to meet the goals we already have, and there's a heavy work on updating the action plan, climate action plan, and that's our focus now. But that will certainly be looked into before next year.
Yes, very good questions. Just first on the finance ministers, as you notice, the World Bank was under investigation at that COP, and the World Bank has never been as vulnerable as coming into this COP. And I think you all know what I'm referring to in terms of the leadership of that institution. And let's not forget that the Bretton Woods institutions grew out of the Second World War. They are the foundation of our financial system. They've been around for a while. There has been an enormous tension in the climate response between the United Nations approach, one country, one vote, versus the Bretton Woods approach, $1, one vote. And that's why the Green Climate Fund is different, and it's a different model. So the multilateral development banks and the reform of the banks is an enormously important topic. And I don't want to depress you by saying anything more about the World Bank in a Friday afternoon. The finance debate is squarely in these COPs, but are they? Should they be different? Let's make it very clear. We should remember most of the things that need to be decided at the international level have already been decided at the international level. The battle now is at the national level, and let's just take one positive thing. Australia has just come out of a deep freeze of 10 years of climate denial. And there was one skier, one woman, that basically broke that monopoly on power. And so there's now a new government in Australia. They swiftly passed their first climate law. Just imagine, Australia, first climate law, 2022. And so things do happen, but it does require leadership. You also referred to the growing focus on litigation. I understand that that's what you were referring to. That's very much a national issue and needs to be because of the jurisdiction. And that's really going to be affecting very much the shift of finance. And we talked about 100 billion, and we don't have time to talk about this here. But what this is really about is shifting financial flows. Just think of these major rivers. You just take the Þjórsá and just move it over to Hvítá. It's enormous shifts, but it's not so much new money. It's smarter money. And that's what these litigations are very important. And this is why, for example, the shareholders in ExxonMobil, for example, is a hugely important thing. But it's very much going to be specific to individual jurisdictions. And so I'm personally, if you asked me to reflect on it, I need to qualify, my daughter is a lawyer, so this is not a criticism of that profession. But we need to be careful that we don't go down a road that just employs a lot of lawyers for a long time. Justice delayed is justice denied, as Martin Luther King said.
Moving on to a lawyer.
Representing lawyers here. No, I would just like to maybe continue a little bit what you were saying, because listening to this, of course it's wonderful that people are meeting up in such large scale and trying to figure out solutions, but it does feel a little bit from the outside as this is being pushed towards the sort of greenwash direction, that oil companies are actually controlling the agenda to a large extent is a huge worry. Like Tinna was explaining, that they could actually stop the wording from becoming phased out or whatever is crazy in my opinion. So I think what we maybe need to be talking a little bit more about is corruption. Corruption as a huge part of climate crisis, and also this huge emphasis on growth, and which capitalism provides us with, like that we always have to be growing, which makes no sense in the situation we're in. And I do feel a little bit like she was talking, that we have sort of, this is great, let's do all this talk and let's have all these strategies and let's continue, but we also need hardcore action at this point, hardcore actions. We cannot wait for this all to be slowly developed somewhere in COP95 or something. So I would like to say that, I mean, in this country we need to start because we live here, like you're saying, but I feel more like identifying with the film Woman at War at this point than all this policy bullshit that's coming from my nation. I have to be completely honest, because it does feel like we have lost towards the stóriðjustefna, you know, the heavy polluting industry in this country, and we just come to terms with it, and we don't try to change it anymore because all those big plants have already been built. Now we're having an environmental minister saying, okay, we need to destroy nature to save nature. We need to start doing this all over again to do orkuskipting. I mean, are we in a farce or what? So I feel we need to be talking more sort of like roar than like, oh, tweaks. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, actually, I was on the similar terms as Katrin, as it's well known that there's parallels between the imperative of economic growth and the emission of CO2, and that's what has caused it. And even and the escalation is still going on, and so it comes to the question that all that talk is that empty words to hide the reality of the same more of the same things, more of business as usual. So how can we go on as pretending we're doing something, but actually, in reality, going to the opposite direction? I don't expect a clear-cut answer, but I think that this is not the end of the discussion. Thank you.
I'd actually like to expand a little bit on this, because in at least one or maybe two presentations or keynotes, there was talk of developed and developing. I am not a fan of the words. I think they make us think in black and white, in binary. And I know that I think it's the now very powerful World Bank has shifted over to the rustling model of using income levels, whereas the bottom of the ladder is the level 1, and us, the wealthiest people on the planet, are level 4, with the bulk of the people being in the middle, namely India and China. Do we need a different language to address this problem? Do we need to shift from thinking that it's us and them, that it's rich and poor, to going over to, yes, it's rich and it's poor, but it's mostly all in the middle? Easy one at the end.
Who do you want to?
If anyone has thoughts, or if this is something that is impeding progress.
Can I just, before you, I think you could maybe answer him, but just on the oil and the oil lobbyism. We can't forget that there are many countries around the table that are lobbying for oil industry. So it comes straight from the parties. So that's what we are dealing with. Just to emphasize that, that's not very easy.
Well, no, this was much more black and white earlier. And so one of the biggest question in the whole process of building a unity of purpose in Paris was, how do you move from basically a list, Annex 1, those are basically the OECD countries at the time, and everyone else, non-Annex 1. And the solution was to go to a bit unclear terminology. And that's how you need to agree at these difficult, you have to have constructive ambiguity. Constructive ambiguity. It helps you come together. So this move from kind of a binary approach is, it was much worse before. So and so things have really evolved. And for any of you that want to kind of like dig a bit deeper into understanding, for example, the financial flows, I would really encourage you to look at the biennial updates of financial flows that are put together by the parties, actually, Standing Committee on Finance. It's under the COP. And it's actually looking at these flows. And that is, so it's really important to kind of start looking under the radar on this. But can I just, as we are closing, I was involved in a conversation just before the COP with the president in Cairo. And we were looking at different scenarios. This was the dream scenario that came out. Let's be clear. This could have been completely blown up. So let's not fool ourselves. This is not some kind of a family picnic, these conversations. These are about strategic concerns. And lobbying, since that's been mentioned, the lobbyists don't go to Sharm El-Sheikh to influence this. They buy their politicians at home. Sorry to be so blunt. And so the power and corruption is a really important part of this. And I would, rather than talk about it in terms of corruption, I would talk about it in terms of lack of transparency and accountability. And that's what is coming back. And this is why this empowerment of young people is part of the solution. And by saying that, I'm not putting the weight on the shoulders, but it's really important when we think of young people, not think of them as victims of climate change. Think of them as the solution. Mm-hmm. And if you were to pick one measure, have you ever thought of this? If you wanted to just tell me one best thing to do about the climate problem globally, what do you think it is?
Abolition of capitalism.
No. It's actually, well, capitalism is dying because of its own devices. Yeah, but no, it's educating girls. Mm-hmm. Educating girls and empowering them to change their environment. For example, in India, I've shared this story about barefooted engineers, where they actually they empower girls in rural villages in India of how how to be an expert on solar cells and all of those things. And then they go back with the equipment to the villages, and they can fix it. And then they can educate, they have the benefit of education because they can read in the evenings. So let's forget about focusing too much of this as a problem. It's a huge problem, it's an enormous problem. But the only way you get out of problems is by focusing on the opportunities. And the opportunities is a better world. And that's entirely in our hands. And I think we will do it. It's only for the historians to describe when these major shifts happened. But I have said this publicly, so I can repeat it. I think Vladimir Putin will be on the cover of the chapter about the end of the fossil fuel era, because he's doing a stellar job of completely killing that energy source. So I think we really have to be, but the sad thing is, I said that educating girls is the key, but we're not doing it.
Can I just add one more short thing? I'm being super quick. I think we have to
1
also
minute,
remember to have the solutions are going to be all kind of small mini solutions everywhere. We need multiple small solutions, not going to be this one fix, hey, let's go to the aluminum smelter in Iceland, shut it down, then we'll be better. We need a lot of small things that we're doing all together. And the more people we have the awareness, the more people doing these small projects, doesn't matter how small it is, can have an impact on the neighborhood in my community. It doesn't matter. All these small little things will make a wave, and the wave gets bigger and bigger and bigger and gets more people into it. So that's what I think. Will not be one big fix, unfortunately. Would be nice, but
Transformation.
And we're always waiting for that one big thing to appear, and all the while ignoring all the small ones. I think that's unfortunately all the time we have. On behalf of the organizers, thank you, Amy, Tinna, Steffi, Halldór, Helga, and Finnur, if you're watching. And those of you who participated and listened, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I wish you all a good weekend. Thank you.